The Pacific Crest Trail is a long, winding scar across the American West. Stretching from the deserts of Mexico to the forests of Canada, it is a place of savage beauty. This is a path of solitude, a journey into the very soul of the wilderness. Many seek to escape the noise of the modern world. They come looking for peace, or perhaps for themselves. The trail demands a price. It is a place where nature is absolute. The familiar world fades away, replaced by an older, more primal one. For those who walk its length, the Pacific Crest Trail becomes a living thing, and sometimes it holds onto the darkness. It keeps the stories of those who encountered something they could not explain. In the summer of 2008, 18-year-old Matt Higgins dreamed of mountains. Inspired by Into the Wild, he craved freedom in nature. The Pacific Crest Trail became his obsession, a chance to prove himself. He planned meticulously, buying gear and embracing the challenge. He imagined solitude under an endless sky, finding himself in the wilderness. On a bright morning, Matt took his first steps, unaware of the trail's darker side. He was walking into a story far darker than he imagined. The first few days were a blur of motion, a rhythm of walking, eating, and sleeping. Matt felt his body adapting to the trail, his muscles ached, a satisfying burn that spoke of effort and progress. The sun beat down on his neck, the weight of the pack on his shoulders felt like a constant, reassuring presence. It was his entire world, everything he needed to survive, strapped to his back. The city and its noise faded into a distant memory, like a half-forgotten dream. Out here the only sounds were the crunch of his boots on the dry earth, the whisper of the wind and the steady thud of his own heart. He was truly alone. This was the solitude he had craved. It was vast and absolute. He would walk for hours without seeing another soul. The emptiness was a clean slate, a space where his thoughts could expand and settle. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a quiet joy that was pure and simple. At night he would set up his small tent under a canopy of stars more brilliant than he had ever imagined. The cosmos wheeled silently above him, a breathtaking display of cold, distant fire. He felt small, insignificant, but in a good way. He was a tiny part of something immense and ancient. He spoke to no one. He had no need for words. The landscape spoke its own language, and he was learning to understand it. He learned the different calls of the birds. He learned to read the signs of the weather in the clouds. He saw deer watching him from the tree line, their dark eyes curious and unafraid. He felt a connection to this wild world, a sense of belonging he had never felt in the crowded streets of his hometown. This was real. This was what he had been searching for. The trail was everything he had hoped it would be, a sanctuary for his restless spirit. Each sunrise was a private miracle. The light would spill over the distant peaks, painting the world in soft shades of pink and gold. Matt would boil water for his morning coffee, the steam rising into the crisp, cool air. He would pack up his camp, leaving no trace behind, and set off again. Another day of walking, another day of silence. The routine was meditative. It cleared his mind. He felt strong. He felt capable. He felt free. He was the master of his own small universe, moving through a landscape of sublime beauty, utterly content in his self-imposed isolation. After a week, the initial euphoria began to wear off. It was replaced by a deeper, more settled awareness. The trail was no longer just a beautiful backdrop. It was a living entity with moods and tempers. The silence, once a comfort, started to take on a different quality. It was heavier now. It seemed to press in on him, especially as the day began to fade. The long shadows cast by the setting sun seemed to stretch and twist into unnatural shapes. The wind sighing through the tall pines no longer sounded like a gentle whisper. It sounded like voices, murmurs just on the edge of hearing. He would stop walking, straining his ears to listen. The sound would vanish, replaced by the normal chorus of the forest. He told himself it was just the wind. It was his mind playing tricks on him, a product of the deep solitude. It was easy to imagine things out here. The brain, starved of human contact, would create its own. He tried to dismiss the feeling, to push it away. He would focus on the path ahead, on the simple mechanics of placing one foot in front of the other. But the feeling would return, a persistent, nagging unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. Sometimes he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. He would spin around, his eyes scanning the dense woods that lined the trail. He saw nothing, just the endless trees standing like silent sentinels. The forest was still, no birds called, no squirrels chattered. The sudden absolute quiet was more unnerving than the imagined whispers. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for him to pass. He felt like an intruder, an unwelcome guest in a place that did not want him there. The sense of peace he had cherished was beginning to fracture. At night, tucked inside his tent, the feeling intensified. The thin nylon walls offered little protection from the vast, dark wilderness outside. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sounded loud and deliberate. He would lie awake for hours, his heart pounding in his chest, listening. He tried to rationalize the sounds. It was just a deer, or a raccoon, or some other nocturnal creature going about its business. But the sounds didn't feel natural. They felt furtive. They felt intelligent. He started to dread the setting of the sun, knowing it would bring the darkness and the sounds that came with it. The journey took him north, deeper into the Lassen National Forest. The landscape changed. The forests grew thicker, the trees taller and closer together. The sky was often hidden behind a dense ceiling of green boughs, plunging the trail into a perpetual twilight. A damp chill clung to the air even at midday. The trail became more difficult, a narrow ribbon of dirt winding through a labyrinth of ancient trees. The profound silence here was different. It was older, heavier, it felt watchful. Matt's unease grew from a quiet hum into a constant, low-level thrum of anxiety. He started looking over his shoulder more often. One afternoon he stopped to refill his water bottles at a small, clear stream. As he knelt by the bank, he noticed something on the other side. Footprints in the soft mud. They were not his, and they were not made by hiking boots. They were bare. The prints were long and narrow, unnaturally so. They were fresh. The edges were still sharp, not yet softened by the wind or sun. He froze, his hand hovering over his water bottle. Someone had been here very recently. Someone walking barefoot in this rugged, unforgiving terrain. He scanned the woods around him but saw nothing. There was no sound but the gurgle of the stream. A cold dread trickled down his spine. It made no sense. No sane person would walk barefoot out here. The ground was littered with sharp rocks, roots, and pine needles. He stood up slowly, his eyes darting into the shadows between the trees. Who was out here with him, and why were they hiding? He looked back at the prints. There were two sets, side by side, heading north. The same direction he was going. They were following the trail. Or maybe, he thought with a jolt of fear, they were following him. The thought was absurd, but he could not shake it. The forest no longer felt empty. He packed his things quickly, his hands clumsy with a sudden urgency. He abandoned the idea of a leisurely afternoon. He needed to put some distance between himself and this place. He started walking at a much faster pace, almost jogging. He didn't look back. He didn't want to see if anyone was emerging from the trees behind him. The peace he had found on the trail was gone, shattered completely. It was replaced by a raw, primal fear. The wilderness was no longer his sanctuary. It had become a cage, and he was suddenly, terrifyingly aware that he was not the only one in it. The fear drove Matt onward, exhaustion gnawing at him as he pushed through the forest. The memory of the bare footprints haunted every step, turning the woods from sanctuary to threat. After days alone, he stumbled into a sunlit clearing and froze. Two figures stood beneath a gnarled oak, backs to him, dressed in immaculate white, utterly out of place. They stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, unmoving, staring up into the branches. Matt's breath caught. The forest seemed to hold its own. He realized, with a chill, he was not alone. The figures made no sound, only watched the tree, as if waiting for something unseen. Matt ducked behind the trees, heart pounding. He watched, hoping for any sign of normalcy, but the figures remained eerily still. Suddenly, in perfect unison, they turned, bodies and all, locking their gaze directly onto him. He was hidden, yet their eyes found him instantly. Dark, vacant, unblinking. Their faces were gaunt, skin pale, expressions empty. The stare was not hostile, just hollow, as if he were invisible or irrelevant. Matt was paralyzed, unable to speak or move, pinned by their gaze. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. He wanted to run, but fear rooted him in place. The figures simply stared, sunlight glinting off their white clothes, as if waiting for him to break. Time seemed to freeze as Matt stood locked in their gaze. An unnatural chill radiated from the figures, seeping into his bones. At last they turned away in perfect synchrony, dismissing him. The spell broke. Matt gasped for air, dizzy with relief. He didn't wait. He turned and fled, crashing through the undergrowth. The encounter was over, but the fear clung to him. He ran, desperate to put distance between himself and the clearing. As dusk fell, Matt set up camp, hands trembling. The memory of the figures haunted him. Every sound in the forest became a threat. He built a fire, but its light felt fragile against the darkness. Huddled by the flames, he imagined the figures lurking just beyond the glow. Sleep was impossible. He lay tense, listening. Then, a metallic clink outside his tent. Not an animal, but something careful, deliberate. His blood ran cold as he realized someone was moving through his camp just inches away. He lay frozen, terror holding him captive in the darkness. Matt waited, breath held, as silence settled over the camp. Hours passed before dawn finally crept in. He unzipped the tent, heart pounding, and found his camp almost untouched. But his bag of trail mix was gone, the pocket unzipped with precision. No mess, no animal tracks, just a clean theft. It was a message. "We were here, we can reach you." The violation was chilling, a reminder of his vulnerability. The theft wasn't about food, it was about fear. Matt felt exposed, utterly at their mercy. The forest seemed to close in, silent and watchful. Dread surged as Matt searched the campsite. He found bare footprints circling his tent. Impossible, silent, deliberate. They had watched him all night, pacing in the darkness. The prints formed a ring, a symbol of entrapment. Panic rising, Matt tore down his camp, barely caring about order. He fled the clearing, glancing back only once. The empty site, the cold ashes, and the circle of prints were all that remained. The forest felt alive, its silence heavy with menace. For Matt, daylight brought no comfort, only deeper fear. The next day was a desperate flight. Matt ran, driven by terror. The memory of the footprints was branded on his mind. It was a psychological game, and he was losing. The trees seemed like cage bars, the mountains like prison walls. He just wanted out, to see a friendly face. He pushed his body to its limit, ignoring the pain. He imagined them keeping pace, just out of sight. He felt their presence like a cold weight. Every shadow seemed to hold a figure. He was being herded, manipulated, and the not knowing was torture. As dusk settled, exhaustion caught him. He collapsed at the side of the trail, trembling. He knew he couldn't spend another night in the tent. He would have to sleep out in the open. He found a shallow overhang offering a solid wall at his back. He huddled there, pulling his sleeping bag around his shoulders. He didn't dare build a fire. Instead, he would sit in the darkness and wait for the sun. Then, the whispers started. They were clearer, closer, weaving through the trees. It sounded like a soft chorus of indistinct words. He could not make out what they were saying, but the tone was conversational, calm. He pressed himself back against the cold stone, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. They could see him, even in the absolute blackness. This was not in his head, this was real. As the night wore on, he heard footsteps, no longer trying to be silent. The footsteps circled, sometimes so close he could almost feel the vibration. He pictured their pale faces turned towards him. Then came the tapping. A soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping on the rock face. Tap-tap-tap. The sound was maddeningly persistent. He wanted to scream, but his body would not obey. It was all designed to break him. He felt his sanity fraying. Sometime before dawn, the sound stopped. It was a vacuum, more unsettling than the noise. He was a boy who had come to the wilderness seeking adventure. He knew the coming of the light would not be the end. The dawn offered no warmth, illuminating Matt's torment. He was exhausted, but he knew he had to move. His mind replayed the nightmarish loop, the whispers, the footsteps, the tapping. He knew they were watching. Fear mingled with anger. He was tired of being the prey. The trail was a dark tunnel, then a snap of a twig behind him. He stopped. This was the breaking point. He spun around, trekking pole raised. He would face them. The trail was empty. The forest was still. Then, a calm, gentle voice drifted from the trees. "There's no need for that," it said. Matt's heart hammered. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We've been walking with you," the voice said, closer this time. "We wanted to see where you were going." The voice came again, joined by a woman's voice. "But the trail isn't finished," they said. They emerged slowly from the gloom between the trees. It was the man and woman from the clearing. Dressed in pristine white, they seemed to glow in the dim light. Their faces were gaunt, pale, and emotionless. Their dark, empty eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Matt stared, his mind struggling to comprehend. Their stillness was predatory, their silence a weapon. This was not human. He stood there, trembling, waiting for their move. The man raised a hand. He pointed at the trail behind him. "The trail isn't finished," he said in a dead monotone. They were sending him on, deeper into their nightmare. The morning light brought no relief. The two figures melted back into the shadows, disappearing silently. Matt was left alone, shaking with terror. He was a piece in their game. He turned and began to walk. He felt their eyes on him. Every tree was a potential hiding place. The silence confirmed his utter isolation. He walked in a fugue state, haunted by the memory. The miles blurred together. Late in the afternoon he heard the rumble of an engine. Hope flared painfully in his chest. He crashed through the undergrowth. He burst out of the tree line onto a paved highway. The sight of the ordinary world was overwhelming. He collapsed onto the gravel, weeping with relief. A logging truck driver found him. The driver took the wild-eyed boy to the nearest town. In the clinic, Matt spoke of whispers and figures, but his story sounded insane. The doctor and sheriff offered rational explanations, attributing it to stress and exhaustion. His family took him home, relieved but worried. The confident boy was gone, replaced by a haunted young man. He rarely spoke of the trail, unable to convey the terror he faced. Years passed as Matt tried to build a normal life, but the scars remained. The figures in white haunted his dreams, a constant reminder that the world was not as safe as he wanted to believe. Matt never went back to the Pacific Crest Trail. His hiking boots gathered dust. He read online forums, seeing mentions of strange encounters and unsettling feelings. There were other stories of two silent figures dressed in white. These tales were usually dismissed, but for Matt they were a chilling validation. He often wondered what they were. Ghosts, demons, he considered every possibility. The lack of an answer was its own form of torment. He had looked into the heart of the wilderness and found a cold, predatory intelligence. Or perhaps they simply wanted him to deliver a message, a warning, a story to be told that the wilderness holds secrets far older and darker than any map can show. The trail isn't finished, but where does it lead?